Hey guys, tonight we journey back to ancient Egypt, to a world of scorching sunlight, endless sand, crowded riverbanks, and lives far more difficult than most people imagine. Before you settle in, take a moment to get comfortable, maybe dim the lights, and prepare to travel more than 3,000 years into the past. When many people think of ancient Egypt, they picture magnificent pyramids, golden treasures, mysterious tombs, and powerful pharaohs surrounded by luxury. It sounds impressive from a distance. Yet, for the overwhelming majority of Egyptians, life looked nothing like the glittering treasures displayed in museums today. Tonight, you are not a king. You are not a noble. You are not a wealthy merchant. You are simply an ordinary person trying to survive another year beside the Nile. And that is exactly why you probably would not survive ancient Egypt. Our story begins around the year 1250 BC, during the reign of one of Egypt's most powerful rulers. The empire stretches far beyond the Nile Valley. Temples rise above cities. Monumental statues watch silently over the land. Priests perform rituals that have been practiced for centuries. Yet none of that matters much to a young farmer named Hori. Hori wakes before dawn. He does not wake because he feels rested. He wakes because he has no choice. The air inside his small mud brick house is already warm. During the night, several family members slept on woven mats spread across the floor. There is little privacy. The walls provide shelter from the wind, but they cannot stop the heat that dominates much of the year. His wife, Tia, is already moving quietly through the darkness. A small oil lamp flickers. Their 2 children remain asleep. For now, outside, the first faint colors of morning appear above the eastern horizon. The Nile lies nearby, calm and dark. To modern eyes, the river would appear beautiful. To Hori, it is something much more important. The Nile is life itself. Without it, everyone here would die. The river determines harvests, taxes, food supplies, and survival. Every year, people wait anxiously for the flooding season. If the waters rise too little, crops suffer. If they rise too much, homes and fields may be damaged. The balance is delicate, and nobody controls it. As Hori steps outside, he feels fine dust beneath his feet. He drinks a small amount of water, not because he wants to, because dehydration can become dangerous quickly. Ancient Egypt is hot, very hot. Many modern visitors underestimate just how exhausting constant heat can be. There are no electric fans, no air conditioning, no refrigerated drinks waiting nearby. The sun itself becomes an enemy that must be endured day after day. Hori joins several neighbors walking toward the fields. Nobody speaks much. The workday has not yet begun, but everyone knows it will be long. Fields spread across the fertile strip bordering the Nile. Beyond that green ribbon lies the desert, an endless sea of sand and rock. The contrast is remarkable. Life exists only because the river allows it. One day of labor follows another. Planting, digging, repairing irrigation channels, carrying loads, harvesting grain, transporting supplies. The tasks never truly end. People often imagine ancient Egypt as a civilization built by extraordinary engineering. That is true. What they forget is that nearly every achievement required human labor, an enormous amount of human labor. Hori spends hours beneath a blazing sky. Sweat runs down his face. His shoulders ache. His hands have developed thick calluses from years of work. This is normal. Almost everyone he knows lives similarly. In the distance, a government official arrives. Conversations become quieter. Officials represent authority. Authority means taxes, and taxes are rarely welcomed. Ancient Egypt possesses one of the most organized governments of the ancient world. Scribes record harvests carefully. Administrators track resources. Local officials inspect fields. This efficiency helps the kingdom function. It also means the government knows what it expects from farmers. When crops are harvested, a portion belongs to the state. A portion may belong to temples. A portion supports local authorities. Only what remains belongs to the farmer. And if harvests are poor, taxes do not always become easier. That reality creates constant anxiety. A single bad season can push families toward disaster. Hori remembers a flood several years earlier that failed to reach expected levels. The harvest suffered. Food became scarcer. People worried continuously. Rumors spread through villages. Some claimed the gods were displeased. Others blamed local officials. Most simply feared the future. Fear is a familiar companion in ancient societies, not because people are weak, because life is fragile. A broken tool can create serious problems. An injured animal can threaten a family's livelihood. A sickness can become fatal. There are few safety nets, very little margin for error. As midday approaches, the heat intensifies. Workers seek whatever shade they can find. Meals remain simple. Bread, beer, perhaps onions, maybe dried fish if fortune has been kind. Many Egyptians consume beer regularly, though it differs greatly from modern versions. It provides calories and can be safer than questionable water supplies. The meal fills the stomach, but only temporarily. Food insecurity remains a reality for many households. When evening finally arrives, Hori returns home exhausted. Yet the day is not entirely over. Animals require attention. Repairs need completing. Children need care. Tasks continue until darkness settles over the village. As night deepens, the sounds change. The heat slowly weakens. Voices drift from neighboring homes. Dogs bark occasionally. Insects hum beside the river. For a brief time, life feels peaceful. Then a child begins coughing. The sound is familiar. Too familiar. Disease represents one of the greatest dangers facing ancient people. Modern medicine does not exist. Germs remain unknown. Antibiotics are thousands of years away. Even relatively minor illnesses can become serious. The next morning, news spreads through the village. An elderly woman has died. No one seems shocked. Sadness exists, but surprise does not. Death appears frequently in ancient Egypt. Children die. Adults die. Infections spread. Accidents occur. Many people never reach old age. Average life expectancy remains far lower than modern standards. Yet life continues. It must. The fields still require labor. The river still flows. The sun still rises. Several days later, Hori accompanies neighbors transporting grain. The journey takes them near a larger settlement. Here he witnesses something unusual. A wealthy official traveling with servants. Fine clothing, jewelry, comfort. The contrast is striking. For a moment, Hori observes a completely different world existing within the same kingdom. Some Egyptians enjoy remarkable privilege. Most do not. This imbalance is not unique to Egypt. It appears throughout history. But standing beneath the hot sun, while watching another man's servants carry his belongings, certainly makes the difference feel significant. That evening, Hori's son develops a fever. At first, nobody panics. Children become sick. It happens often. Tia prepares remedies known within the village. Neighbors offer advice. Everyone hopes the illness will pass. Yet during the following night, the fever grows worse. The boy sweats heavily. His breathing becomes uneven. Hori remains awake for hours, listening, waiting, wondering. Helplessness can be terrifying, especially when someone you love is suffering. A healer is summoned. The healer possesses experience, knowledge passed through generations. Perhaps some remedies work. Perhaps some do not. Ancient medicine contains a mixture of practical observations, religious beliefs, and traditional treatments. Sometimes patients recover. Sometimes they never do. Nobody can predict the outcome with certainty. As dawn approaches, Hori sits outside his home. The sky gradually brightens. Birds move across the river. The village slowly awakens. Another day begins. Yet for Hori, nothing feels ordinary, because he has started to understand a truth shared by countless people throughout ancient Egypt. Survival is never guaranteed, not by hard work, not by faith, not by experience, not even by love. And as the sun rises over the Nile once more, a messenger arrives carrying troubling news from another village farther downstream. Several families have become sick, very sick, and some people are already whispering that whatever is spreading may soon reach them as well. Hori watches the messenger disappear into the morning light. Then he looks back toward his home, toward his feverish son, toward the uncertain days ahead. And for the first time, he he feels a cold fear that has nothing to do with the desert night. The cold fear remained with Hori long after the messenger had vanished down the dusty path. The village slowly returned to its routine, yet a strange uneasiness lingered beneath every conversation. Men worked in the fields. Women prepared meals and carried water. Children chased one another through narrow lanes between mud brick homes. At first glance, everything appeared unchanged. Yet everyone had heard the news. Several families downstream were ill. Nobody knew exactly why. Nobody knew exactly how many. And nobody knew whether the sickness was moving toward them. In the ancient world, uncertainty could be as frightening as the disease itself. Hori stepped back into his house. The interior felt warmer than usual. His son lay on a woven mat, eyes half closed. The fever had not broken. Tia dipped a cloth into cool water and gently pressed it against the boy's forehead. She had slept little. Neither had Hori. Ancient Egyptians possessed impressive medical knowledge for their time. Some healers understood wounds, broken bones, and certain illnesses surprisingly well. Medical texts recorded treatments and observations. Surgeons could perform procedures that might surprise modern readers, but even the most skilled healer faced limits. There were many diseases no one understood, many infections nobody could stop, many fevers that simply had to run their course. Or not. The village healer arrived shortly after sunrise. He examined the boy again. He spoke calmly. That alone offered some comfort. The healer mixed herbs and recited prayers to protective gods. Such combinations were common. Religion and medicine often worked side by side in ancient Egypt. To modern minds, this might seem strange. To ancient Egyptians, it made perfect sense. The visible world and the invisible world were deeply connected. A physical illness might have a physical cause, or a spiritual one, or both. The healer eventually departed. His advice was simple. Keep the boy cool. Give him water. Wait. Waiting, unfortunately, was often the hardest task. The day grew hotter. Outside, work continued. Because work always continued. Ancient societies rarely allowed the luxury of stopping. Fields still needed tending. Animals still needed feeding. Taxes still needed paying. Even families facing hardship often had no choice but to keep laboring. By midday, Hori reluctantly left for the fields. The decision felt wrong, yet remaining home would not help his son recover. The family still needed food. The irrigation channels required maintenance. Life demanded attention. The Nile shimmered beneath the sunlight. Its surface looked peaceful, beautiful even, but appearances could be deceptive. The river gave life. The river also took it away. Every Egyptian understood this. Children learned early to respect the water. Strong currents could sweep away swimmers. Boats occasionally overturned. Floodwaters sometimes destroyed property. And then there were the animals. While working near the riverbank, Hori noticed a group of fishermen shouting. Several men pointed toward the water. Others hurried backward. The disturbance spread quickly. Within moments, word traveled along the bank. A crocodile, few creatures, inspired greater caution. The Nile crocodile was one of the most dangerous predators in the ancient world. Massive, powerful, patient, many Egyptians lived their entire lives beside waters that contained these formidable reptiles. Most encounters ended peacefully. Some did not. The fishermen kept their distance. Nobody wished to test their luck. The crocodile eventually disappeared beneath the surface. Conversations resumed, but the brief interruption served as a reminder. Danger existed everywhere, sometimes hidden just beneath calm water. As afternoon approached, government officials arrived once more. Whenever officials appeared, attention followed. Several scribes accompanied them. The scribes carried writing equipment and tablets. Ancient Egypt depended heavily upon record keeping. Scribes occupied an important position within society. Most people could not read or write. Scribes could. That skill granted influence. The officials began inspecting grain stores. Measurements were taken carefully. Numbers recorded. Questions asked. Nobody argued openly. Doing so rarely ended well. One farmer farther down the field appeared nervous. Very nervous. His harvest had been weaker than expected. Everyone knew it. The officials knew it too. Unfortunately, knowing the reason behind a poor harvest did not necessarily reduce obligations. The farmer spoke quietly. An official listened. The conversation remained brief. The official wrote something, then moved on. The farmer stared at the ground afterward. No one needed to ask what troubled him. Ancient taxes could be unforgiving. Back home, Tia greeted Hori with cautious optimism. Their son's fever seemed slightly lower. Only slightly. Yet even a small improvement felt encouraging. That evening, the family shared bread, onions, and a little fish. Simple food. Nothing extravagant, but enough for now. After darkness settled over the village, neighbors gathered outside. The night air felt cooler. Stars emerged overhead. Few places on Earth offered skies as clear as those above ancient Egypt. Without artificial lights, the heavens appeared magnificent. Countless stars stretched across the darkness. Ancient Egyptians watched them carefully. The stars helped measure time, marked seasons, guided travelers, connected earthly life to divine order. As villagers sat together, stories naturally emerged. Stories always emerged. Human beings have been telling them for thousands of years. An elderly man spoke about a particularly devastating flood he remembered from childhood. Another described years when crops failed. Someone mentioned a leopard spotted near desert cliffs. decades earlier. The details varied. The message remained familiar. Life had always been difficult, yet generations endured. That realization provided comfort. Not certainty, but comfort. Several days passed. The fever finally broke. Relief spread through Hori's household like cool water after a long drought. The boy remained weak, but he was alive. For the first time in many nights, Hori slept deeply. Unfortunately, good fortune rarely lasted forever. A week later, another challenge arrived, this time from the state itself. Word spread throughout the village before sunrise. Laborers were needed for a government project. Mandatory labor service was a normal part of life in ancient Egypt. Many modern people imagine slaves building every major monument. The reality was often more complicated. Large numbers of ordinary Egyptians performed labor for state projects during certain periods. Roads, temples, storehouses, construction sites, transportation work. The kingdom demanded manpower, and manpower came from people like Hori. The announcement was simple. Several men from the village would leave within days. Hori's name appeared on the list. He felt disappointment immediately, not because the work itself surprised him, because leaving meant abandoning his family temporarily. Tia tried to remain positive, yet she worried. Travel always involved risk. The roads were safer than many ancient regions, but accidents happened, illness happened, bandits occasionally appeared, and every day away from home created additional strain. The departure arrived sooner than expected. Before dawn, Hori joined dozens of other laborers. Some came from neighboring villages. Others had traveled farther. The group moved northward along dusty roads. The journey offered a different view of Egypt. Fields stretched beside the Nile. Palm trees swayed gently. Boats drifted across the water. Temples rose above settlements. Magnificent structures, visible from great distances. To modern tourists, these monuments inspire wonder. To many ancient workers, they represented something else. More labor, more obligations, more days beneath the sun. After 2 days of travel, the workers reached their destination, a large construction project. Stone, timber, workers everywhere. Supervisors moved constantly between teams. Instructions echoed across the site. The scale impressed Hori. Ancient Egypt excelled at organizing labor. That talent helped create one of history's most enduring civilizations. It also demanded extraordinary effort from ordinary people. Work began immediately. Heavy loads required moving. Stone blocks required positioning. Supplies required transporting. Hours passed slowly beneath relentless sunlight. The labor exhausted everyone. Muscles ached, hands blistered, shoulders burned, yet stopping was rarely an option. At midday, workers rested briefly. Food was distributed. Bread, beer, Basic provisions, enough to sustain labor, not enough to make anyone comfortable. As Hori sat beside another worker from a distant village, conversation drifted toward survival. The man laughed softly, not because life was easy, because complaining changed nothing. He explained that 3 of his children had died before reaching adulthood. He said it matter-of-factly, without drama, without tears, simply as a fact of life. Hori listened quietly. The story disturbed him, yet similar stories existed everywhere. Infant mortality haunted ancient societies. Many parents buried children. Many children buried parents. Loss appeared frequently enough that people learned to carry it alongside daily life. That night, workers slept in crowded quarters. The air smelled of dust and sweat. Snoring echoed through the darkness. Some men fell asleep instantly. Others stared into the night, thinking about home, thinking about families, thinking about uncertainties waiting for them when they returned. Hori lay awake longer than usual. His thoughts drifted toward Tia, toward his recovering son, toward the Nile, toward the endless cycle of labor that shaped every year of his existence. He wondered whether life would ever become easier. The answer, though he did not yet know it, was about to become very clear, because the next morning, before sunrise had fully illuminated the horizon, a supervisor arrived carrying urgent news from the river. A boat loaded with workers and supplies had disappeared during the night, and no one knew whether anyone aboard had survived. A silence settled over the workers as the supervisor delivered the news. The missing boat had been traveling during the night, carrying supplies, tools, and dozens of laborers assigned to projects farther north. Such journeys occurred regularly along the Nile. Boats were the highways of ancient Egypt. They moved grain, stone, timber, livestock, officials, soldiers, merchants, and countless ordinary people. Most trips ended safely. This one had not. No wreckage had yet been discovered. No survivors had arrived at nearby settlements. The river had simply swallowed the vessel. Men exchanged uneasy glances. Everyone understood what that could mean. The Nile was generous. The Nile was merciless. Both statements were true. Work resumed despite the troubling announcement. Large kingdoms rarely paused because of individual tragedies. Stone still needed moving. Schedules still mattered. Supervisors still expected results. Hori joined a team assigned to transport heavy limestone blocks across uneven ground. The task sounded simple. It was not. Several dozen men pulled ropes, while others guided wooden sledges beneath the immense weight. Every movement demanded coordination. One mistake could result in crushed limbs, or worse. Sweat soaked through linen garments before the morning was half finished. Dust-coated skin. Muscles trembled from exertion. The sun climbed steadily higher. For modern people accustomed to machines, performing difficult tasks. The sheer physical demands of ancient labor are difficult to imagine. Many workers spent nearly every day of their lives performing strenuous activity. Their bodies adapted, yet even adapted bodies had limits. As the afternoon wore on, one laborer stumbled. The block shifted slightly. A supervisor shouted. Several workers reacted instantly, preventing disaster. The man who had stumbled remained standing, but barely. His face looked pale beneath layers of dust. Exhaustion, heat, perhaps illness. Nobody could be certain. A cup of water was brought. A brief rest followed. Then work continued. That evening, rumors regarding the missing boat spread through the camp. Some claimed crocodiles had attacked. Others believed the vessel struck hidden obstacles beneath the surface. A few whispered about angry gods. Ancient Egypt was a deeply religious society. The gods influenced nearly every aspect of life. People prayed before journeys, before harvests, before childbirth, before important decisions. Temples stood throughout the land. Priests performed rituals daily. Offerings were made regularly. Faith provided explanations when answers were otherwise unavailable. And there were many things ancient people could not explain. Later that night, a messenger finally arrived. The missing boat had been found, or at least part of it. Several fragments of timber had washed ashore downstream. A few bodies had also been recovered. Not many. Most remained missing. The river had claimed them. No one spoke much afterward. Workers quietly prepared for sleep. The conversation had ended because there was nothing left to discuss. The dead would not return. The following weeks passed in a blur of labor. Days merged together. Wake before dawn. Work. Eat. Work again. Sleep. Repeat. Time moved differently in such circumstances. Each individual day felt long. Entire weeks disappeared quickly. Hori's hands became tougher than ever. Small cuts appeared frequently. Some healed. Others became infected. In modern times, a simple infection often receives treatment within hours. Ancient people enjoyed no such luxury. Even minor wounds deserved caution. A scratch could become swollen. A swollen wound could become dangerous. Dangerous wounds could become fatal. One worker developed a severe infection in his arm. At first, nobody worried. Then the swelling worsened. The man developed a fever. Soon, he could no longer perform his duties. The camp healer attempted treatment. Prayers were offered. Remedies applied. For several days, the worker lingered between improvement and decline. Then one morning, his sleeping mat was empty. No announcement was necessary. Everyone understood. Death remained a familiar visitor, not always expected, never truly welcome, but familiar nonetheless. Months passed before Hori finally received permission to return home. The journey south felt shorter than the journey north. perhaps because anticipation pushed him forward. Every mile brought him closer to his family, closer to familiar surroundings, closer to the life he understood. When his village finally appeared in the distance, relief washed over him. Children played near the houses. Smoke drifted from cooking fires. The Nile sparkled beneath afternoon sunlight. For a moment, everything seemed unchanged. Then he noticed new faces and missing faces. Time had continued moving while he was away. Several villagers had died. Others had married. A newborn child had arrived. An elderly fisherman had passed away. Life and death had continued their endless exchange. Tia greeted him with a smile that instantly erased much of his exhaustion. Their son looked stronger, healthier, older. The simple joy of seeing his family again reminded Hori why he endured everything else. Yet peace proved temporary. The flooding season approached. Every year, the Nile transformed the landscape. This cycle made Egyptian civilization possible. Without annual flooding, the fertile fields would not exist. The rich soil, deposited by floodwaters, sustained millions of people. Yet the flood also carried uncertainty. Nobody knew exactly how high the waters would rise. Villagers watched carefully. Measurements were taken. Predictions shared. Conversations revolved around the river. As days passed, the water level increased steadily. Fields nearest the banks disappeared beneath muddy currents. Children watched with fascination. Adults watched with concern. Too little flooding could mean poor harvests. Too much flooding could destroy homes and infrastructure. The ideal balance was never guaranteed. One evening, a group of villagers gathered beside the river to discuss conditions. An older farmer frowned while studying the water. He had witnessed decades of floods. His opinion carried weight. The man eventually spoke. The river was rising faster than he preferred. Not alarmingly fast, but noticeably. Several others nodded. No one argued. Experience mattered. That night, strong winds swept across the region. The village rattled beneath their force. Mud brick houses endured. Palm trees swayed. Dust filled the air. Hori slept lightly. When dawn arrived, shouting erupted outside. People rushed toward the riverbank. Hori joined them. The sight immediately explained the commotion. Part of the shoreline had collapsed during the night. Several small structures near the water were damaged. One storage building had vanished entirely. The floodwaters had taken it. Fortunately, no one appeared injured. Still, the incident reminded everyone how quickly circumstances could change. For modern people accustomed to weather forecasts, emergency services, and large-scale infrastructure, such events remain stressful. For ancient villagers, they could threaten survival. Storage buildings contained food. Food meant security. Security was precious. During the weeks that followed, the flood reached its peak. Water covered vast areas. Boats moved through places that had recently been dry land. Travel patterns changed. Work patterns changed. Everything adapted to the river's rhythm. Then, gradually, the waters began retreating. Rich black soil remained behind, the foundation for another growing season, the foundation for another chance at survival. Not prosperity, not luxury, simply survival. And even that required effort. Soon farmers returned to the fields. Seeds were planted, irrigation systems repaired, tools maintained. Another cycle began. As Hori worked one morning, he noticed his son observing nearby. The boy was older now, old enough to help with simple tasks, old enough to begin learning the realities of life. Ancient childhood often ended quickly. Many children assumed responsibilities at surprisingly young ages. There was work to do. Families needed assistance. Survival demanded contribution. The boy asked questions while helping. Questions about farming. Questions about the Nile. Questions about distant cities. Hori answered patiently. Yet part of him felt uneasy, because he knew what awaited the child. Hard labor, risk, uncertainty, the same challenges faced by nearly everyone born outside the privileged elite. Few paths existed for dramatic social advancement. Most people lived lives remarkably similar to those of their parents and their grandparents and generations before them. Weeks later, travelers passed through the village carrying stories from distant regions. Stories spread rapidly in ancient societies. One traveler described a caravan attacked in the desert. Another spoke of settlements struggling with food shortages. A third mentioned tomb robbers caught near a necropolis. The stories differed. The lesson remained constant. Life beyond the village carried dangers of its own. The desert, in particular, inspired respect. Many modern people picture Egypt primarily as desert. Ancient Egyptians viewed it differently. The fertile Nile Valley was home. The desert was something else entirely. A harsh realm of heat, isolation, and death. Travelers crossing it faced enormous challenges. Water shortages, exposure, navigation difficulties, bandits, wild animals. A wrong decision could prove fatal. One afternoon, while listening to these travelers, Hori found himself wondering how anyone managed to survive in such a world. Then he looked around, at the fields, at the villagers, at the river, and he realized something important. People survived because they had no alternative. Generation after generation adapted to conditions modern people would find unbearable. They learned where to find water, when to plant crops, how to read the river, how to endure heat, how to cope with loss, how to continue after tragedy. These skills were not optional. They were necessary. And as the sun dipped toward the western horizon that evening, another traveler arrived carrying news that would soon affect every household in the village. A royal tax assessment was coming. officials and scribes were already traveling through nearby settlements. Measurements would be taken, records updated, obligations reviewed, and everyone knew exactly what that meant. The next challenge had already begun. The travelers' news spread through the village faster than a desert wind. Before sunset, nearly everyone had heard it. By nightfall, every household was discussing the same subject. Taxes, not war, not disease, not crocodiles. Taxes for many ordinary Egyptians. Few things inspired more anxiety. The kingdom required grain. The temples required grain. Local officials required grain. The machinery of one of history's greatest civilizations depended upon resources flowing continuously from the countryside. And those resources came from people like Hori. That night's sleep arrived slowly. The village seemed quieter than usual. Families sat together after dark, speaking in low voices. Calculations filled their minds. How much grain remained? How much would be needed for the household? How much might officials demand? Would the harvest be considered sufficient? Would it be judged lacking? Nobody knew, and uncertainty rarely brought comfort. When dawn arrived, Hori walked into the fields with several neighbors. The conversations were cautious. One farmer believed the assessment would be reasonable. Another predicted trouble. A third simply shrugged. After decades of working the land, he claimed there was little value in worrying about events that had not yet happened. Perhaps he was right, yet worry continued anyway. Human nature had not changed much over 3,000 years. Several days later, the officials arrived. The entire village seemed to notice at once. A small group approached along the river road. Several guards accompanied them. Behind the guards walked scribes. To modern eyes, the scribes might not appear especially impressive. They carried writing equipment rather than weapons. They wore no crowns. They commanded no armies. Yet their presence attracted immediate attention because scribes possessed something powerful. Literacy. Ancient Egypt relied heavily upon written records. Harvests, taxes, land boundaries, official decrees, religious texts, administrative documents. Everything depended upon accurate record keeping. Most villagers could not read the symbols the scribes created so effortlessly. The scribes could. That skill elevated their status considerably. Children from farming families rarely became scribes. The education required years of training. Those fortunate enough to receive such education often escaped the harshest forms of physical labor. As one ancient Egyptian text famously suggested, life as a scribe was preferable to many other occupations. Watching the officials enter the village, Hori understood why. The scribes looked clean, rested, comfortable, not wealthy beyond imagination, but comfortable. The contrast with laborers working beneath the sun every day was difficult to ignore. The assessments began immediately. Fields were examined, measurements taken, questions asked, notes recorded. Nothing appeared rushed. The officials operated with practiced efficiency. This was not their first village, nor would it be their last. For hours, they moved from one location to another, checking, recording, calculating. By afternoon, they reached Hori's fields. He stood quietly while measurements were completed. The lead scribe spoke politely enough, yet every word carried weight. The figures being recorded would influence the coming months, perhaps the coming year. The process seemed simple. The consequences were not. When the officials finally departed, villagers gathered in small groups. Everyone wanted to compare observations. Everyone wanted reassurance. Unfortunately, nobody possessed answers, only guesses. Days passed. Work continued. Life moved forward. Then the results arrived. Some families breathed easier. Others did not. Hori's obligations proved manageable, though not comfortable. A significant portion of his grain would leave the household. Enough remained for survival, assuming nothing went wrong. And things often went wrong. Nearby, another farmer received far worse news. His harvest had been weaker than expected. His obligations remained substantial. The man stared silently at the figures. His face revealed little, but everyone understood the situation. One difficult season could create problems lasting years. Ancient life frequently balanced upon narrow margins. A poor harvest, a sick animal, an injury, a flood, any of these could upset the delicate balance, keeping a family secure. Several weeks later, grain deliveries began. Boats transported supplies along the Nile. Storehouses filled. Officials supervised operations. The system worked remarkably well, considering the era. Yet its efficiency offered little comfort to those watching portions of their harvest disappear. One evening, Hori sat outside his house after a long day. The air felt cooler, a welcome change. His son sat nearby, tracing shapes in the dust. The boy had become increasingly curious about the world. Questions emerged constantly. Why did the river rise? Why did taxes exist? Why did priests perform certain rituals? Why did some people possess wealth while others struggled? Some questions were easier to answer than others. The last one proved especially difficult. Hori eventually responded with honesty. Life was not always fair. The boy considered this carefully, then returned to drawing shapes. Perhaps the answer satisfied him. Perhaps not. Children often recognized truths adults preferred to avoid. Several days later, the village prepared for an important religious festival. Ancient Egyptian religion touched nearly every aspect of existence. The gods watched over the land, protected communities, maintained cosmic order, or so people believed. Temples served as more than places of worship. They were economic centers, political centers, social centers. Some temples owned enormous amounts of land, employed large numbers of workers, stored significant resources. Their influence extended far beyond religious ceremonies. As preparations continued, villagers cleaned homes and gathered supplies. Excitement replaced anxiety, at least temporarily. People welcomed opportunities to celebrate. Life contained enough hardships already. Moments of joy deserved appreciation. The festival itself brought color and energy to the settlement. Music filled the air. Offerings were presented. Prayers were spoken. Families gathered. Neighbors shared food. Children laughed. For a short while, burdens seemed lighter. Not absent, simply lighter. Hori enjoyed watching his son participate. The boy's excitement proved contagious. Sometimes happiness appeared in surprisingly simple forms. A good meal, a successful harvest, a festival, a healthy child. Ancient people valued such moments because they understood how fragile they could be. The celebration lasted several days. Then ordinary life returned. Fields once again demanded attention. Animals required care. Tools needed repair. The endless cycle resumed. As autumn progressed, troubling signs began appearing across the countryside. At first, they seemed minor, almost insignificant. A few reports from neighboring villages. Nothing more. Then additional reports arrived, and more after that. The concern gradually grew. Pests, large numbers of them. Farmers throughout the region began noticing insects damaging crops. The problem was not yet severe, but it was spreading. Agricultural societies feared such developments. Food production formed the foundation of everything else. Threatened food production, and every other part of society eventually felt the consequences. One morning, Hori inspected part of his field and noticed damage himself. Not catastrophic damage. Not yet, but enough to raise concern. Several neighboring farmers observed similar problems. The conversations returned. Calculations returned. Anxiety returned. Ancient life rarely remained peaceful for long. Weeks passed. The insects continued multiplying. Some fields suffered more than others. Nobody could predict the final outcome. The uncertainty proved exhausting. Every day farmers inspected crops. Every day they hoped conditions would improve. Every day they worried. Meanwhile, another challenge emerged. Prices began increasing in local markets. Not dramatically, not immediately. Gradually, merchants responded to growing concerns. Whenever food supplies seemed uncertain, prices often followed. For wealthier individuals, this created inconvenience. For poorer families, it created danger. Hori noticed the difference quickly. Simple goods required more grain, more effort, more sacrifice. Nothing catastrophic. Not yet, but enough to notice. One evening, an elderly villager shared memories of a difficult period decades earlier, a time when harvests failed repeatedly. Food became scarce. Families sold possessions. Some left their homes, searching for opportunities elsewhere. The old man spoke quietly. The younger listeners paid close attention. History often survives through stories, and those stories carry warnings. The message was clear. Things could become much worse. As winter approached, conditions remained uncertain. Some fields recovered, others struggled. Nobody knew whether next year's harvest would compensate for current losses. Nobody knew whether additional challenges waited ahead. Ancient Egyptians lived with this uncertainty constantly. Modern people often imagine the past as stable. In reality, stability was something many communities fought to maintain. Every season brought new risks. Every year introduced new variables. Survival required resilience, adaptation, patience, and occasionally luck. One afternoon, while working near the riverbank, Hori noticed several boats approaching from the north. At first, he paid little attention. Boats were common. Then he noticed something unusual. The vessels carried soldiers. Not many, but enough. The sight immediately attracted attention throughout the village. Soldiers rarely appeared without reason. Neighbors gathered along the river. Questions spread rapidly. What had happened? Was there trouble? Had rebellion broken out somewhere? Had foreign enemies appeared? No one possessed answers. The boats continued southward without stopping, yet their appearance left everyone unsettled. That evening, as darkness settled across the Nile Valley, rumors multiplied faster than facts. And before the next sunrise, the village would learn why armed men were suddenly moving through the region. The news they carried would remind everyone that dangers did not always come from disease, floods, taxes, or hunger. Sometimes they came from other human beings. The rumors ended shortly after sunrise. A government messenger arrived from a larger settlement several miles away. By midday, much of the village knew the truth. The soldiers had not been moving because of a local dispute, nor had they come to collect taxes. The reason lay farther away, far beyond the fields, far beyond the villages scattered along the Nile. Reports had arrived of unrest near regions controlled by Egypt's borders. The exact details varied depending on who told the story. Some spoke of raiders. Others mentioned rebellious groups. A few claimed foreign enemies were causing trouble. The ordinary villagers could not know for certain. Information traveled slowly in the ancient world. Messages passed from person to person. Details changed. Stories grew. Facts blurred. Yet one reality remained clear. When trouble appeared anywhere within the kingdom, ordinary people often felt its effects, even if the conflict occurred hundreds of miles away. Hori listened carefully while the messenger spoke. Most of what he heard sounded distant, remote, almost unreal. He He had never traveled beyond a small portion of Egypt. Like many ancient people, his world remained relatively local. His village, nearby settlements, the fields, the river, everything else existed largely through stories. Yet distant events possessed a way of becoming local events, particularly when governments required resources. Several weeks later, another announcement arrived. This one concerned transportation and supply work. Additional grain shipments would be organized. Certain villages would contribute labor. Others would contribute provisions. The kingdom needed support. The kingdom always needed support. Nobody protested openly. People understood the nature of authority. Still, private conversations revealed frustration. Families already worked constantly. Harvest concerns remained unresolved. Food prices remained higher than before, and now further obligations appeared. Ancient civilizations achieved remarkable things. They also demanded remarkable sacrifices from ordinary people. As autumn deepened, travelers passing through the region brought additional news. Some stories involved military movements. Others described increased security along trade routes. Several merchants mentioned growing concerns about bandits. That possibility worried villagers more than distant conflicts. Bandits represented a direct threat. Immediate, personal, ancient roads were not entirely lawless. Egypt possessed organized administration and security forces. Compared with many ancient regions, travel could be relatively safe. But relatively safe did not mean completely safe. A traveler carrying valuable goods still faced risks. So did merchants. So did isolated farmers. One evening, a boat arrived carrying a family from another district. Their appearance attracted attention immediately. The father looked exhausted. The mother appeared anxious. Their belongings were limited, far too limited. Neighbors gathered to hear their story. The account spread quickly. Bandits had attacked a caravan route near their previous home. Several people had been killed, others injured, goods stolen. The family decided to relocate before conditions worsened. Whether the danger was truly severe or merely perceived, nobody could say. Fear often traveled faster than facts. Still, the story unsettled everyone because it reminded them how fragile security could be. Civilization depended upon order. Order depended upon constant effort. Without that effort, problems multiplied rapidly. Hori thought about the story while working the following day. His son accompanied him. The boy was learning more responsibility each season. He could carry tools, assist with simple tasks, help tend animals. Ancient childhood offered little opportunity for prolonged leisure. Responsibilities arrived early, not because parents were cruel, because survival required participation. As they worked, the boy asked another question, one of many. Have you ever seen a battle? Hori smiled slightly. The answer was no. He He had seen arguments, fights, accidents, but never a true battle. The boy seemed disappointed. Perhaps he imagined glorious warriors and heroic victories. Children often imagined such things. Adults usually imagined something else. Pain, death, widows, orphans, the realities hidden behind stories of glory. That evening, an elderly veteran happened to visit the village. His timing could not have been better. Several children gathered around him eagerly. They wanted stories. The old man possessed plenty. At first, he described travel, strange lands, foreign cities, long marches, interesting customs. The children listened with fascination. Then someone asked about war. The veteran grew quiet. For several moments, he said nothing. When he finally spoke, his answer surprised many listeners. War, he explained, mostly involved hunger, exhaustion, fear, and waiting. Not excitement, not constant heroics. Waiting, marching, more waiting, then moments of terror. The children looked disappointed. The adults nodded knowingly. Reality often proved less glamorous than imagination. The veteran eventually departed. His words lingered, particularly for Hori, because they echoed a broader truth about ancient Egypt. Many modern people picture magnificent monuments and powerful pharaohs. Ordinary Egyptians often experienced something different. Work, responsibility, uncertainty, and endurance. Winter gradually approached. Temperatures became more comfortable. The brutal summer heat faded. Fields remained active. Markets remained busy. Life continued. For a while, conditions appeared stable. Then a theft occurred. The victim was a farmer living near the edge of the village. Several tools disappeared during the night. Nothing especially valuable by modern standards, yet valuable enough. Tools represented labor. Labor represented survival. Losing tools created serious problems. The theft triggered concern throughout the settlement. Most villagers trusted one another. Communities depended upon cooperation. Still, desperation occasionally drove people toward bad decisions. The village headman organized discussions. Questions were asked. Information gathered. Nobody admitted responsibility. No stolen property appeared. The mystery remained unsolved. Several families began securing belongings more carefully. Doors were checked. Storage areas monitored. Not because people suddenly distrusted everyone, because hardship sometimes changed behavior. A week later, another incident occurred. This time, several goats disappeared from a nearby settlement. The news traveled quickly. Whether thieves or wandering animals were responsible remained unclear, yet anxiety increased. Ancient people rarely enjoyed the luxury of assuming things would work out. Experience taught caution. As winter progressed, Hori spent increasing amounts of time repairing equipment. Wooden handles cracked, ropes frayed, Tools wore down. Maintenance consumed countless hours throughout ancient history. Modern people often replace broken items. Ancient people repaired them again and again and again. A well-maintained tool might serve for years. A neglected one could fail at exactly the wrong moment. One afternoon, while gathering materials, Hori encountered a traveling merchant. The merchant sold a variety of goods: oil, linen, small household items, tools. The man also carried stories. Merchants frequently served as sources of information. They moved between settlements, observed conditions, heard rumors, collected news. This merchant had traveled widely, farther than most villagers ever would. His stories fascinated listeners. He described bustling cities filled with officials and craftsmen, massive temples decorated with colorful scenes, ships arriving from distant regions, markets overflowing with goods. The descriptions sounded almost unbelievable. To Hori's son, they sounded magical. The boy listened with wide eyes. For a moment, he seemed transported somewhere beyond the village, beyond the fields, beyond the Nile itself. When the merchant finally departed, the boy immediately announced that he wished to travel one day. Hori laughed softly. Many young people shared similar dreams. Some achieved them. Most did not. Life often kept people close to where they were born, not because travel was impossible, because responsibilities anchored them. Fields needed tending. Families needed support. Communities needed participation. Dreams competed with obligations. Obligations usually won. Months passed. The concerns about pests slowly eased. Some crops performed better than expected. Food prices stabilized somewhat. A sense of cautious relief spread through the region. Not happiness exactly. Relief. Ancient people often learned to appreciate relief. It arrived more frequently than prosperity. Then, during a cold morning near the end of winter, another traveler arrived. His appearance immediately attracted attention. The man's clothes were dusty. His face looked exhausted, and one arm hung awkwardly in a sling. He had been injured. Villagers offered water, food, a place to rest. Hospitality mattered, especially in a world where travelers depended upon strangers. The man accepted gratefully. Later, after recovering slightly, he explained what had happened. His boat had struck submerged debris farther upstream. Several passengers were injured. One had died. The vessel nearly sank. Only quick action prevented disaster. The listeners grew quiet. Many had experienced similar stories before, perhaps not personally, but through neighbors, relatives, friends. Ancient life contained hazards everywhere. The river, the roads, the fields, the desert, even ordinary work carried risks. The traveler eventually fell asleep. Exhaustion overcame him. Hori watched the man resting and found himself thinking about survival. Real survival, not heroic adventures, not dramatic battles, simply surviving another year, another season, another harvest. That challenge alone demanded enormous effort, and as the winter sun slowly descended beyond the western horizon, a group of officials appeared unexpectedly on the road leading into the village. Their arrival was unusual. Their expressions were serious, and before the day ended, they would announce a project so large that it would remove dozens of men from their homes for months at a time, including Hori. Once again, his life was about to change. The officials wasted little time. By sunset, the entire village had gathered near the central open space where announcements were usually made. Men stood shoulder to shoulder. Women listened from nearby doorways. Children lingered at the edges, curious but mostly silent. Everyone sensed the importance of the moment. Government representatives did not make unexpected visits without reason. The lead official unrolled a document and began speaking. His voice carried clearly across the crowd. A major royal construction project had been approved. Additional labor would be required. Villages throughout the region would contribute workers. The project would last several months. Selected men were expected to report when summoned. A murmur moved through the crowd, not loud enough to be considered disrespectful, just enough to reveal disappointment. Nobody was surprised. Projects of this kind had occurred before. Temples needed expansion. Storehouses needed construction. Canals needed repair. Monuments required maintenance. Ancient Egypt excelled at organizing large-scale labor. That ability helped sustain one of the longest-lasting civilizations in history. Yet every impressive achievement carried a hidden cost. Someone had to perform the work, usually ordinary people. The official continued reading names, one after another. Several men lowered their heads when called. Others stared silently into the distance. Then Hori heard his own name. For a brief moment, he closed his eyes, not in anger, not in protest, simply resignation. The decision had already been made. Refusal was not a realistic option. When the gathering ended, villagers slowly returned home. Conversations erupted immediately. Some men complained quietly. Others accepted the situation with weary practicality. Most had experienced similar obligations before. Still, knowing something may happen and hearing your name announced publicly were two very different things. That night, Hori sat beside Tia while their children slept. The small oil lamp cast weak shadows across the room. Neither spoke for several minutes. Words seemed unnecessary. Eventually, Tia broke the silence. She asked how long he would be gone. Hori admitted he did not know. Weeks, perhaps months. The uncertainty worried them both. Ancient families often endured long separations. Military service, labor projects, trade journeys, administrative duties. The reasons varied. The emotional difficulty remained similar. A few days later, the selected workers departed. The journey took them northward once again. This time, the group was even larger. Men from numerous villages traveled together. Some knew one another. Most did not. The roads bustled with activity. Government officials moved frequently between settlements. Supply caravans traveled in both directions. Boats filled the river. The kingdom never truly stood still. After several days, the laborers finally reached their destination. The scale of the project became immediately apparent. Hundreds of workers already occupied the site. Perhaps more. Stone blocks lay stacked in enormous quantities. Timber arrived continuously. Supervisors directed operations from every direction. Dust filled the air. Voices echoed constantly. The entire place felt alive. Alive and exhausting. Hori stood silently for a moment, taking it all in. The sheer amount of labor represented here was difficult to comprehend. Every stone would require human effort. Every wall, every platform, every structure. Human effort transformed ideas into reality. And human effort had limits. The workers received sleeping quarters shortly afterward. The accommodations were basic. Rows of sleeping spaces crowded together. Little privacy, little comfort, yet compared to what some laborers experienced elsewhere in the ancient world, conditions could have been worse. Food would be provided. Shelter existed. Water remained available. These things mattered. The following morning began before sunrise. A horn sounded through the darkness. Men woke immediately. Some groaned. Others simply rose without complaint. Complaining rarely changed reality. The first workday started as the eastern horizon brightened. Tasks varied. Some teams moved stone. Others transported supplies. Others prepared foundations. Still others maintained tools and equipment. Hori joined a transport crew. The labor proved relentless. Heavy loads demanded constant exertion. The sun gradually climbed higher. Temperatures increased. Sweat-soaked clothing. Dust clung to skin. Hours passed slowly. Modern machinery could perform many of these tasks in minutes. Ancient workers possessed only muscle, coordination, and determination. The contrast is difficult to overstate. A modern person suddenly transported into this environment would likely struggle immediately, not because modern people lack intelligence, because their bodies are adapted to entirely different conditions. Ancient laborers spent years building physical endurance. Their daily lives prepared them for hardship. Even so, many still suffered. The midday break brought temporary relief. Workers gathered in shaded areas where possible. Bread was distributed. Beer followed. Conversations remained brief. Most men focused on resting. Energy was precious. One laborer nearby stretched his aching shoulders and laughed. The sound seemed strange, given the circumstances. Someone asked what amused him. The man pointed toward a massive stone block. Then he remarked that future generations would admire monuments without ever considering the backs that carried them. Several workers chuckled. The observation felt painfully accurate. History often remembers kings. It remembers generals. It remembers monuments. It rarely remembers the laborers who made everything possible. The afternoon proved even harder. Heat radiated from the ground itself. Every movement felt heavier. Every task required greater effort. By sunset, many workers looked completely exhausted. Yet the day had not been unusual. It had simply been normal. And that reality explains why many modern people would struggle to survive ancient Egypt. Hardship was not an occasional event. It was woven into daily life. The days blended together. Work, food, sleep, work again. A routine both simple and demanding. After several weeks, Hori noticed how quickly injuries appeared among the workforce. Blisters became cuts. Cuts became infections. Back problems developed. Shoulders weakened. Knees suffered. Human bodies can accomplish extraordinary things. They also wear down. One morning, a worker slipped while helping maneuver a heavy stone. The accident happened in seconds. The consequences lasted much longer. The man's leg became trapped. The resulting injury was severe. The entire site paused briefly. Several workers rushed to assist. The injured laborer survived. That much became clear. Whether he would ever walk normally again remained uncertain. The incident lingered in everyone's thoughts because it could have happened to anyone. Accidents represented one of the greatest threats in ancient workplaces. There were no modern safety regulations, no protective equipment, no emergency medical teams waiting nearby. Mistakes carried serious consequences, sometimes fatal consequences. A few days later, another problem emerged. Illness. It began quietly. Several workers developed fevers, then more. Nothing dramatic at first. A cough here, fatigue there, the sort of symptoms easily ignored until they became impossible to ignore. The camp healers worked constantly. Treatments were provided, advice offered, prayers spoken, yet sickness continued spreading. Crowded living conditions rarely helped. Neither did exhausting labor. Workers shared sleeping areas, shared meals, shared tools. Diseases often moved easily through such environments. Hori remained healthy initially, but concern spread rapidly. Everyone had witnessed outbreaks before. No one wished to experience another. Several men became too weak to work. Others attempted to continue despite obvious illness. Ancient workers often lacked the luxury of complete rest. Responsibility remained. Obligations remained. Work remained. One evening, after an especially difficult day, Hori sat beside a laborer named Mena. The two men had become friends over the previous weeks. Mena came from a village farther south. He possessed a dry sense of humor and an endless supply of stories. That night, however, he seemed unusually thoughtful. The conversation drifted toward age. Neither man considered himself old, yet both felt older than they once had. Hard labor accelerated that feeling. Mena observed that his father had died before reaching what modern people would consider old age. Several others he knew had experienced similar losses. Ancient life expectancy remained far shorter than modern standards, not because everyone died young. Some people lived long lives, but many never reached old age at all. Disease, injury, childbirth, malnutrition, accidents. The list of dangers was long. Survival itself often represented an achievement. As weeks became months, the construction project gradually advanced. Walls rose, platforms expanded, structures took shape, progress became visible. Workers occasionally paused to admire what they were building. Despite the hardship, there was satisfaction in seeing results. Human beings naturally take pride in creating things, even difficult things, yet the price remained high. Every completed section represented countless hours of labor, countless aching muscles, countless sacrifices. Then one morning, just before sunrise, an urgent alarm echoed through the camp. Workers emerged from their sleeping quarters, confused, half awake. The commotion centered near the storage area. Guards were shouting. Supervisors were gathering. Something had happened during the night, and within minutes, rumors began spreading through the camp. A large quantity of grain had disappeared. Someone had stolen it, and the authorities intended to find whoever was responsible. The alarm echoed through the camp long after the shouting had stopped. Workers gathered in small groups, exchanging uncertain looks. Nobody knew exactly what had happened. Nobody knew how much grain had disappeared. Most importantly, nobody knew who had taken it. Yet everyone understood one thing. The authorities were taking the matter very seriously. Grain was not merely food. In ancient Egypt, grain was wealth. Grain paid workers. Grain supported temples. Grain supplied armies. Grain helped maintain the entire administrative system. A large theft represented more than a simple crime. It represented a challenge to order itself. As dawn brightened the horizon, supervisors assembled the labor force. Hundreds of men stood silently beneath the growing sunlight. The atmosphere felt different from previous mornings. Heavier, more tense. Several guards stood nearby, holding staffs. The sight alone encouraged cooperation. The lead official addressed the workers. His words were calm but firm. A significant quantity of grain had disappeared during the night. An investigation would begin immediately. Everyone would remain available for questioning. Anyone possessing information was expected to come forward. Failure to cooperate would be viewed unfavorably. No one spoke. The official nodded. Then the questioning began. For most workers, the process proved brief. Where had they been? Who had they spoken with? Had they noticed anything unusual? The questions repeated throughout the morning. Hori answered honestly. He had spent the evening eating with several laborers before sleeping in the communal quarters. Nothing unusual had occurred. Nothing suspicious had attracted his attention. The scribes recorded every answer carefully. Watching them work reminded Hori once again how much authority written records possessed. A conversation could be forgotten. A written record remained. Throughout the day, speculation spread. Some believed outsiders had entered the camp. Others suspected workers. A few blamed corrupt officials. Rumors multiplied faster than facts. Human nature had not changed. By evening, no arrests had been made. Work resumed the following day, though the atmosphere remained strained. Men spoke more cautiously. Groups seemed quieter. Everyone wondered what would happen next. 3 days later, the mystery appeared solved, at least according to the authorities. Several workers were arrested shortly before sunrise. The news traveled instantly. Guards escorted the accused men through the camp, while laborers watched from a distance. One of the prisoners shouted his innocence. Another remained silent. A third appeared terrified. No one knew what to believe. The evidence, whatever it might be, remained in the hands of officials. For ordinary workers, certainty proved impossible. Yet one thing was clear. The accused men faced serious consequences. Ancient Egypt possessed laws. It possessed courts. It possessed legal procedures. Many modern people imagine ancient justice as completely arbitrary. The reality was more complicated. Egyptian officials often investigated disputes, heard testimony, and maintained records. Legal systems existed. They were not identical to modern systems, but they existed. At the same time, punishments could be severe, especially when authorities viewed a crime as threatening social stability. Several days later, word spread regarding the outcome. The accused men had been found guilty. Whether they truly were guilty remained impossible for most workers to know. The judgment had been made. The matter was considered settled. The punishment was harsh, very harsh. The details circulated through the camp in whispers. Everyone listened carefully. Punishments in ancient Egypt varied depending upon the crime. Fines, beatings, forced labor, confiscation of property, more severe penalties in extreme cases. The purpose was not simply revenge. The purpose was deterrence. Authority wanted people to think twice before breaking the rules. Watching the reaction throughout the camp, Hori suspected the lesson had been effective. Fear spread rapidly. perhaps even more rapidly than respect. The incident left a lasting impression. For days afterward, conversations centered on justice. Was the punishment fair? Were the correct men arrested? Could innocent people be accused? Nobody possessed complete answers. Yet everyone understood the larger reality. Ordinary people lived under systems they could rarely influence. That truth extended far beyond ancient Egypt. One evening, while sitting beside Mena after work, Hori asked whether he trusted officials. Mena laughed softly, not mockingly, simply wearily. The question itself seemed amusing. The older laborer eventually replied that trust mattered less than necessity. The kingdom functioned because people obeyed. Whether they liked every decision was another matter entirely. Hori considered this carefully. The answer contained uncomfortable wisdom. The following weeks passed without further incidents. The stolen grain gradually disappeared from conversation. New concerns replaced old ones. Such was life. Problems arrived continuously. Once one challenge passed, another usually appeared. The construction project continued advancing. Workers settled back into familiar routines. Then an accident occurred that nobody could ignore. A scaffold collapsed. The structure had appeared stable, strong enough, safe enough. Then suddenly it wasn't. The collapse happened during the afternoon. One moment workers were performing their duties. The next moment shouting erupted across the site. Men rushed toward the scene. Dust filled the air. Wood splintered. Several laborers had fallen. The extent of their injuries became apparent quickly. Some escaped with bruises. Others were not so fortunate. One man never stood again. The accident cast a shadow across the camp. Deaths caused by disease often felt distant, gradual. This death had been immediate, visible, witnessed by dozens. That difference mattered. That night, the sleeping quarters remained unusually quiet. Even Mena struggled to find humor. The reality facing ancient workers had once again revealed itself. Danger existed everywhere, not only in wars, not only in epidemics, not only in floods. Danger lived within ordinary work itself. Every day carried risks. Most days ended safely. Some did not. As months passed, the project finally neared completion. Walls stood where empty ground had existed before. Massive structures dominated the landscape. Officials seemed pleased. Supervisors appeared less stressed. Workers sensed the end approaching. The possibility of returning home became increasingly real. That thought alone boosted morale. Hori found himself thinking about Tia constantly, about his son, about the village, about simple routines he had once taken for granted. Home possessed a special value when it remained far away. One afternoon, a high-ranking official visited the site. His arrival attracted immediate attention. The man's clothing alone revealed his status. He moved through the construction area, accompanied by attendants and guards. Workers paused briefly as he passed, not because they wished to stop, because curiosity proved irresistible. For most laborers, opportunities to observe powerful individuals remained rare. The official inspected the project carefully. Questions were asked, reports delivered, measurements reviewed. The visit highlighted another reality of ancient Egypt. Society was highly structured. Status mattered enormously. Some people lived lives of relative comfort. Others spent their days hauling stone beneath the sun. The gap between those experiences could be vast, yet everyone remained connected to the same system, a system dependent upon labor, administration, religion, and authority. As the weeks continued, workers began preparing for departure. Tools were organized, supplies inventoried, final tasks completed. The project was nearly finished. Then unexpected news arrived. Not bad news, surprising news. Additional workers would be released early. Several names appeared on the list, including Hori's. The announcement spread excitement immediately. Men who had expected months more labor suddenly found themselves preparing for the journey home. Hori could scarcely believe it. After so long away, he would soon see his family again. The next morning, he departed with a group of returning laborers. The road south felt different, lighter somehow. Every step carried him closer to home. The journey lasted several days. Fields gradually replaced construction sites. Familiar landscapes returned. The Nile accompanied them much of the way. Steady, unchanging, ancient. Finally, one evening, as the sun sank toward the western desert, Hori caught sight of his village. Smoke drifted from cooking fires. Children played near the houses. Dogs barked in the distance. Everything looked familiar, yet something immediately felt wrong. Very wrong. Several villagers stood gathered near the center of the settlement, far more than normal. Their faces looked serious, concerned. Some appeared frightened. As Hori approached, he noticed Tia among them. The expression on her face stopped him cold. It was not relief. It was not happiness. It was fear, real fear. Before he could ask what had happened, an elderly neighbor stepped forward. The old man's voice trembled slightly. Then he delivered the news. During Hori's absence, several people from nearby villages had vanished. Not died, not relocated, vanished, and now strange stories were spreading throughout the Nile Valley. Stories that were becoming impossible to ignore. The news followed Hori into his own home, even after the evening meal, even after darkness settled across the village, even after his children fell asleep. The stories remained. Vanished. The word itself carried an unsettling weight. People died. People became sick. People suffered accidents. Those things were familiar, understandable, but disappearing without explanation felt different. It created questions, and questions often frightened people more than answers. Tia sat beside the small oil lamp while Hori listened carefully. Several individuals from neighboring settlements had reportedly gone missing during recent months. Not all at once, not from a single location. The disappearances were scattered. A fisherman who never returned, a traveler who vanished during a short journey, a young man who left home before sunrise and was never seen again. Perhaps each incident possessed its own explanation. Perhaps they were unrelated, yet human beings naturally search for patterns. Soon people began connecting the stories. Rumors spread. Speculation followed. Fear grew. Hori remained skeptical, at least initially. Years of hard experience had taught him that many mysteries eventually revealed ordinary explanations. A boat overturns. A traveler gets lost. A crocodile attacks. Bandits strike. The world contains enough dangers without needing supernatural ones. Yet the rumors continued spreading, and some became increasingly strange. The following morning, Hori accompanied several villagers into the fields. Work continued as always. The earth needed tending regardless of gossip. Still, conversation repeatedly returned to the same topic. One farmer claimed evil spirits were responsible. Another blamed criminals operating near trade routes. A third insisted that angry gods were punishing the region. Nobody agreed. Everybody speculated. The uncertainty allowed imagination to flourish. This was hardly unique to ancient Egypt. Throughout history, unexplained events often generated extraordinary stories. Ancient Egyptians possessed a rich spiritual worldview. The visible world represented only part of existence. Gods influenced daily life. Spirits existed. The dead retained importance. Magic played a role in many beliefs. For most people, these ideas formed part of ordinary reality. Consequently, unusual events often received unusual explanations. Several days later, a traveler arrived carrying yet another story. The man claimed he had encountered an abandoned campsite near the desert edge. Nothing unusual there. Travelers occasionally left campsites behind. What attracted attention was what he found, or rather, what he did not find. Belongings remained. Supplies remained. But the people were gone. The traveler insisted the scene appeared wrong, disturbingly wrong, as though individuals had departed suddenly, without preparation, without reason. The story spread rapidly. By sunset, nearly everyone in the village had heard it. By the following morning, details had already changed. That often happened. Stories evolved as they traveled. Facts blended with imagination. Each retelling added something new, an extra detail, a dramatic observation, a mysterious clue. Soon the abandoned campsite sounded far stranger than it probably had been originally. Even so, the effect remained powerful. People were uneasy. As the weeks passed, Hori noticed subtle changes within the community. Travelers became more cautious. Individuals preferred moving in groups whenever possible. Parents watched children more carefully. Villagers avoided unnecessary journeys after dark. Nothing drastic, just small adjustments. Small adjustments repeated throughout the region. Fear rarely arrives all at once. More often, it accumulates gradually, one concern at a time. Meanwhile, life continued, presenting ordinary challenges. The harvest required attention. Tools required maintenance. Animals required care. Reality rarely paused for mystery. One afternoon, Hori and his son traveled to a nearby settlement to exchange grain for supplies. The journey was uneventful. The road remained busy. Farmers moved goods. Merchants traveled between communities. Boats drifted along the Nile. Everything looked normal. Yet conversations in the market revealed the same underlying tension. People were talking. Everyone had heard some version of the stories. One merchant dismissed them entirely. Another seemed convinced something dangerous was occurring. A third simply shrugged and focused on business. Practical people often possess limited patience for rumors. Still, even practical people become nervous when uncertainty persists long enough. During their visit, Hori encountered an elderly temple servant. The man had spent decades assisting priests. He possessed a reputation for wisdom, or at least experience. The distinction sometimes mattered. Several villagers asked him about the disappearances. His response surprised them. He advised caution regarding rumors. Fear, he explained, often created larger problems than the events inspiring it. The statement sounded sensible, yet not everyone found it reassuring, because sensible answers rarely satisfy frightened people. The journey home passed quietly. That evening, Hori reflected upon the conversation. The old man might be correct. The stories could easily be exaggerated. Perhaps they already were. Yet one fact remained. People truly had disappeared. Even if the reasons were ordinary, the disappearances themselves were real. The next month brought another challenge. This one had nothing to do with rumors. A severe sandstorm swept across portions of the region. Ancient Egypt was not simply the fertile Nile Valley. Beyond that narrow green ribbon stretched enormous deserts. Those deserts occasionally reminded everyone of their presence. The storm arrived with little warning. The sky darkened. Winds strengthened. Dust filled the air. Visibility vanished. Villagers rushed indoors. Doors were secured. Animals sheltered. For hours, the storm battered the settlement. Sand found its way into everything. Every crack, every opening, every uncovered surface. The experience proved miserable. Yet, for many ancient Egyptians, such events represented part of life. The storm eventually passed. The cleanup consumed days. Fields required inspection. Homes required cleaning. Equipment required repair. Life resumed. It always did. A few days later, a caravan arrived from a distant region. Its members carried fascinating stories, not of disappearances, of tombs, ancient tombs. The conversation immediately attracted attention. Egyptians respected the dead deeply. Tombs held enormous significance. They protected bodies, preserved memory, connected generations. Disturbing a tomb could provoke strong reactions. According to the travelers, several tomb robbers had recently been arrested elsewhere in the kingdom. The crime horrified many listeners. Tomb robbery was not uncommon in ancient Egypt. Valuable goods attracted thieves. Always had, always would. Yet ordinary people often viewed such acts with disgust. The dead deserved respect. The travelers described investigations, arrests, and punishments. The details reinforced another reality of ancient life. Crime existed. Authority responded. The struggle between law and lawbreaking never truly disappeared. Human societies continually balanced between order and disorder. Listening to these stories, Hori found himself thinking about fear once again. People feared robbers. They feared disease. They feared floods. They feared taxes. They feared droughts. They feared unexplained disappearances. Life in ancient Egypt contained endless reasons for concern. Modern people often romanticize the ancient world. They imagine grand temples, golden treasures, and magnificent monuments. Those things existed, but so did constant uncertainty. Most people spent far more time worrying about food than admiring architecture. Far more time worrying about illness than contemplating glory. That evening, after the travelers departed, the village gathered near the riverbank. The weather had become pleasant. The Nile flowed calmly beneath the fading sunlight. Children played nearby. Older villagers shared stories. For a brief period, everything felt peaceful. The rumors seemed distant, almost unimportant. Then a fisherman arrived. The man's boat had returned later than expected. His expression immediately attracted attention. Something had happened. People gathered around him. The fisherman drank water before speaking. Then he described what he had discovered farther downstream. A boat drifting aimlessly. No crew, no passengers, no obvious signs of violence. Simply abandoned. The listeners exchanged uneasy looks. Once again, explanations were possible. The occupants could have reached shore. The boat might have broken loose after an accident. Any number of ordinary scenarios could explain it. Yet the timing felt unfortunate. The story joined all the others. Another mystery, another rumor, another reason for anxiety. That night's sleep came slowly for many villagers, including Hori. The world beyond the village suddenly felt less predictable than before, not because monsters lurked in the darkness, not because spirits walked the desert, but because uncertainty itself had become a companion, and uncertainty often grows strongest when answers remain absent. Then, shortly before dawn, a messenger arrived from a larger settlement to the north. His horse looked exhausted. So did he. The man requested immediate meetings with village leaders. The urgency alone caused concern. By sunrise, word began spreading through the settlement. Authorities had finally decided to investigate the disappearances formally. Officials, scribes, and guards would soon arrive. Questions would be asked, records examined, witnesses interviewed. For the first time, what had begun as scattered rumors was becoming an official matter, and many villagers suspected the investigation might uncover truths far stranger than the stories themselves. The investigators arrived 3 days later. Their approach was visible long before they entered the village. A small group of guards walked ahead. Several officials followed. Behind them came scribes carrying writing equipment and bundles of documents. The sight immediately attracted attention. Children stopped playing. Farmers paused their work. Conversations faded. Official investigations were uncommon enough to feel important, and important events rarely passed unnoticed. The village leaders greeted the newcomers respectfully. Formal introductions followed. Questions began almost immediately. The authorities wasted little time. They had visited several settlements already. More remained ahead. Efficiency mattered. The lead official appeared neither intimidating nor friendly. He simply looked tired, very tired. After weeks of travel and countless interviews, exhaustion had become impossible to hide. Yet his attention remained sharp. Every answer received careful consideration. Every detail was recorded. The scribes worked continuously. Their reed pens moved across writing surfaces with remarkable speed. Watching them always fascinated Hori. Symbols flowed effortlessly from their hands. Entire conversations transformed into written records. Most villagers could not understand the marks, yet they understood the importance. Those symbols possessed power. The investigation began with simple questions. Who had disappeared? When? Under what circumstances? Had anyone witnessed unusual events? Had strangers visited recently? The questions continued for hours. One by one, villagers shared what little they knew. Unfortunately, most knew very little. Rumors traveled faster than facts. That reality became increasingly obvious as interviews progressed. One witness repeated a story involving mysterious lights near the desert. Another described strange sounds heard at night. A third claimed travelers had vanished without leaving footprints. The official listened patiently. The scribe recorded everything, yet neither seemed especially impressed. Years of experience had likely taught them a valuable lesson. People often remembered fear more clearly than evidence. By the second day, patterns began emerging. Not supernatural patterns, human patterns Several missing individuals had traveled alone. Others had journeyed through dangerous areas. Some disappeared near regions known for criminal activity. A few had likely suffered accidents. The explanations were not dramatic. They were simply plausible, and plausibility often matters more than excitement. One evening, Hori happened to overhear part of a conversation between two officials. They spoke quietly, not secretly, just quietly. One remarked that many mysteries became less mysterious once sufficient information was gathered. The other agreed. Fear filled gaps in knowledge remarkably well. The observation stayed with Hori because it seemed true. The following week brought further developments. Additional reports arrived from neighboring settlements. The investigators compared records, dates, locations, descriptions. Slowly, a clearer picture emerged. Not every disappearance shared the same cause. That realization proved important. People had been searching for a single explanation, a single threat, a single source. Reality appeared more complicated. One traveler had likely drowned. Another probably encountered bandits. A third may have become lost in the desert. Several cases remained uncertain, yet certainty was not required for understanding. The world was dangerous enough without inventing additional dangers. This conclusion disappointed some villagers. Strangely enough, people often prefer dramatic mysteries over ordinary explanations. A hidden curse sounds more memorable than a boating accident. A supernatural force sounds more interesting than poor planning. Human imagination naturally gravitates toward extraordinary stories. Reality frequently moves in quieter directions. The investigation continued. Life continued as well. Fields required attention. Harvest preparations resumed. Animals needed care. Ordinary responsibilities rarely paused for official inquiries. One afternoon, Hori accompanied his son to repair part of an irrigation channel. The task demanded patience. Water flowed where it wished unless guided carefully. Ancient Egypt depended upon irrigation. Without it, agriculture would struggle. Without agriculture, civilization itself would struggle. The system required constant maintenance. Every generation inherited responsibilities from the previous one. As father and son worked, the boy asked questions about the investigators. Would they solve every mystery? Would they find every missing person? Hori considered carefully before answering. Probably not. The response seemed unsatisfying. Yet honesty mattered. Ancient people understood something modern people sometimes forget. Not every question receives an answer. Not every disappearance is explained. Not every uncertainty vanishes. Sometimes knowledge remains incomplete. The boy frowned briefly, then returned to work. Perhaps he understood more than Hori expected. A few days later, the investigators prepared to leave. Before departing, the lead official gathered villagers together. His summary was simple. Many stories circulating through the region were exaggerated. Some were entirely false. Certain disappearances possessed likely explanations. Others remained unresolved. Travelers should remain cautious. Communities should continue reporting suspicious activity. There was no evidence of a widespread supernatural threat. The final statement triggered mixed reactions. Some people appeared relieved. Others looked unconvinced. Beliefs rarely change overnight, especially beliefs rooted in fear. The officials departed the following morning. Their presence faded quickly into the distance. Life gradually returned to normal, or at least as normal as ancient life ever became. The disappearance stories slowly lost influence. New concerns replaced old ones. As always, one challenge ended. Another arrived. Several weeks later, unusual weather affected parts of the Nile Valley. The river remained healthy. The fields remained productive. Yet temperatures behaved strangely. Hot days alternated with unexpectedly cool nights. Farmers noticed. Farmers notice everything. Their livelihoods depend upon observation. At first, the changes seemed minor. Then crops in several areas began showing signs of stress. Not severe stress, just enough to create concern. Concern in agricultural societies spreads rapidly. Food stood at the center of everything. Threatened food production, and anxiety follows naturally. Village discussions once again shifted toward uncertainty. Would the harvest suffer? Would food prices rise? Would taxes remain unchanged? Questions multiplied. Answers remained scarce. The cycle felt familiar, perhaps because it was familiar. Ancient life often involved managing risks rather than eliminating them. One evening, while sitting outside beneath a sky crowded with stars, Hori spoke with Mena, who had recently passed through the region during his travels. The two friends shared a meal and exchanged stories. Mena listened carefully while Hori described recent events. The investigation, the rumors, the concerns about crops. When Hori finished, Mena laughed softly, not because the situation was amusing, because it sounded normal. Every generation believed its problems were unique, yet many challenges repeated endlessly throughout history. Fear, weather, food, authority, health, the details changed. The themes remained remarkably consistent. The observation lingered in Hori's thoughts long afterward. Perhaps that was why surviving ancient Egypt proved so difficult. Not because every day contained extraordinary danger, because ordinary difficulties never truly disappeared. The struggle accumulated, day after day, season after season, year after year. A single challenge might be manageable. 1,000 small challenges gradually wore people down. As winter approached once more, the village prepared for another cycle of work and uncertainty. Children grew older. Adults grew older. The river continued flowing. Time moved forward, relentlessly. One cold morning, shortly after sunrise, a boat arrived carrying an unusual passenger. The man wore fine clothing, not luxurious, but clearly expensive. He was accompanied by attendants. More importantly, he carried documents bearing official seals. The visitor requested meetings with local leaders immediately. The request alone suggested importance. Throughout the day, rumors spread. By evening, the reason became known. A major census was being organized. Land, property, livestock, people, everything would be counted. Everything would be recorded. For the kingdom, information represented power. For ordinary villagers, information often translated into obligations. Taxes, labor requirements, military service in some cases. The announcement generated immediate concern because everyone understood a simple truth. Whenever the government became interested in counting something, it was rarely doing so merely out of curiosity. And as Hori listened to the discussions unfolding around him, he realized another chapter of uncertainty was about to begin. The officials had come to measure the kingdom, but for people like him, measurements often carried consequences. The census began before most villagers were ready for it, not because people were unprepared, because no one ever truly felt prepared when officials arrived carrying documents, measuring tools, and questions. The visitor from the north remained in the village for several days. During that time, his attendants rarely rested. Records were reviewed. Land boundaries were discussed. Livestock counts were updated. Information flowed continuously from the villagers to the scribes. And once again, reed pens moved tirelessly across writing surfaces. Hori watched part of the process from a distance. The efficiency impressed him. It always did. Ancient Egypt had survived for centuries, partly because of organization. The kingdom counted, measured, recorded, tracked. Administrators knew which regions produced grain, which regions supplied labor, which regions required assistance. That knowledge helped maintain stability. Yet for ordinary people, stability often came attached to obligations. A measured field could be taxed. A counted animal could be assessed. A recorded harvest could create expectations. The system benefited the kingdom. Whether it benefited individual farmers depended upon circumstances. One afternoon, a pair of scribes arrived at Hori's property. The visit remained professional, polite, routine, yet he still felt nervous. Questions followed familiar patterns. How much land did he cultivate? How many animals did the household own? How many people lived there? The answers were straightforward. The implications were not. Everything entered the records. Nothing seemed too small to note. His son observed the process with fascination. The boy had developed a growing interest in scribes, perhaps because they represented a different path through life, a path that did not involve endless days of agricultural labor. As the officials departed, the boy asked whether he could become a scribe one day. The question caught Hori by surprise. He considered it carefully. The honest answer was difficult. Possibly, but not easily. Education required opportunity. Opportunity often depended upon circumstances. Many children never received such chances. Still, Hori did not wish to crush the boy's hopes, so he simply told him that learning was always valuable. The answer seemed to satisfy him. For the moment, the census continued throughout the region. Weeks passed. Eventually, the officials moved on. Life returned to familiar rhythms, at least temporarily. Winter settled gently across the Nile Valley. Compared to the brutal heat of summer, the cooler months felt almost pleasant. Work remained demanding, but more manageable. Farmers spent time repairing tools, preparing fields, and maintaining irrigation systems. The endless cycle never stopped. It merely changed form. One evening, while sharing a meal with neighbors, Hori listened to an elderly farmer describe life during his youth. The old man had witnessed countless harvests, countless floods, countless seasons. His memories stretched farther back than most. As often happened, the conversation drifted toward the past. People frequently imagined earlier times as simpler, better, safer. The elderly farmer disagreed. Strongly, every generation believed the previous generation had enjoyed easier lives. Yet every generation faced its own hardships. Different hardships, not fewer. The observation produced thoughtful silence because everyone recognized its truth. Ancient Egypt often appears stable when viewed from a distance. Monuments stand for centuries. Dynasties rule for generations. Temples endure. Yet ordinary life remained full of uncertainty. The stability visible in history books rested upon millions of individual struggles, millions of ordinary days, millions of ordinary people. People like Hori. Several weeks later, another challenge emerged. This one arrived quietly. A cough, then another, then another. At first, nobody paid much attention. Winter illnesses were common. They appeared every year. Most passed quickly. Most, unfortunately, not all. The sickness spread gradually through nearby settlements. Nothing dramatic initially. A few households reported fevers. Others reported fatigue. Several older villagers became seriously ill. The pattern felt familiar. Too familiar. Ancient communities lacked modern medical knowledge. They understood symptoms. They understood experience. They understood treatments passed through generations. Yet many illnesses remained mysterious. Invisible enemies often prove the most difficult to fight. The village healer worked constantly. Herbs were prepared, advice distributed, prayers offered. Families did everything they could. Sometimes it helped, sometimes it did not. One elderly fisherman died before spring. Several others came close. Fear returned. Not overwhelming fear. Quiet fear, the kind that settles into everyday life. The kind that accompanies uncertainty. For Hori, the illness carried painful memories. He remembered his son's fever years earlier. The helplessness, the waiting, the endless worrying. No parent forgets such experiences. Fortunately, his family remained healthy, at least for now. The sickness eventually weakened as winter faded. Relief spread through the village. Yet relief often felt temporary. Ancient life taught people not to expect permanent security. Every season introduced new possibilities. Some welcome, some not. As temperatures warmed, attention shifted once again toward agriculture. The Nile remained central to everything. Its annual flooding shaped existence. Its rhythms determined survival. Without the river, ancient Egypt could not exist. The relationship bordered on dependency. Perhaps because it was dependency. One morning, Hori joined several neighbors inspecting water levels. The flood season remained months away. Still, experienced farmers monitored conditions constantly. Observation mattered. Knowledge mattered. The river often provided clues. Those who paid attention sometimes gained advantages. As they worked, a traveler approached from the south. The man carried goods for trade. More importantly, he carried stories. Travelers always carried stories. This traveler had visited several major cities. His descriptions fascinated listeners. Massive temple complexes, bustling markets, government centers crowded with officials, workshops producing goods from across the kingdom. To villagers, such places sounded enormous, almost overwhelming. The traveler described buildings larger than anything many listeners had ever seen. He described wealth, power, luxury. Then he described something else. Crowds, disease, crime, poverty. Even great cities possessed problems. Perhaps more problems than villages. The account reminded everyone of an important truth. Human beings often imagine distant places as better than their own. Reality usually proves more complicated. Every location contains advantages. Every location contains hardships. The traveler stayed 2 nights before continuing north. His departure left behind fresh conversations, particularly among younger villagers. The idea of distant cities captured their imagination. Adventure always sounds attractive from far away. Responsibility sounds attractive from nowhere. One afternoon, while working alongside his son, Hori noticed how much the boy had grown. The child who once required constant supervision now contributed meaningfully to daily work. Time moved quickly, too quickly. Ancient parents likely felt the same thing modern parents feel. Years vanish, children change, life advances without permission. The realization produced mixed emotions: pride, concern, hope, worry, all at once. As spring deepened, conditions improved throughout much of the region. The harvest prospects appeared encouraging. Markets stabilized. Travel increased. For the first time in many months, optimism spread. Not dramatic optimism, measured optimism. Ancient people learned caution. Excessive confidence often invited disappointment. Still, good news remained welcome. Then, one evening, a government courier arrived. His appearance immediately attracted attention. Official couriers rarely traveled without purpose. The messenger requested food and water before delivering his information. The delay only increased curiosity. By sunset, much of the village had gathered. The announcement proved surprising. A large ceremonial festival would soon occur at a major temple farther north. Pilgrims, merchants, officials, priests, thousands of people were expected to attend. Travel routes would become crowded. Markets would expand. Economic activity would increase dramatically. The news generated excitement. Even those with no intention of attending recognized the opportunity. Merchants anticipated profits. Travelers anticipated experiences. Priests anticipated ceremonies. The kingdom anticipated visibility. Large festivals served many purposes: religious, social, economic, political. They reminded people that they belonged to something larger than their individual villages, something larger than themselves. As discussions continued late into the evening, another possibility emerged. Several local families considered making the journey, including some of Hori's neighbors. The festival represented a rare opportunity to see parts of Egypt they had only heard about, to witness magnificent temples, to experience enormous crowds, to participate in ceremonies drawing people from across the kingdom. The idea sounded exciting, perhaps even tempting, yet long journeys always carried risks, costs, uncertainties. The same roads leading toward opportunity could also lead toward danger. And as preparations slowly began throughout the region, Hori found himself wondering whether this great gathering would bring prosperity, or whether it would create entirely new problems. Because whenever large numbers of people gathered together in the ancient world, unexpected things often followed. News of the great festival spread far beyond the village. Within weeks, travelers arriving from every direction seemed to be discussing the same event. Merchants spoke about opportunities. Priests spoke about devotion. Young people spoke about adventure. Older people spoke about logistics. Everyone viewed the gathering through a different lens. Yet everyone understood one thing: it would be enormous. For most villagers, opportunities to witness major religious celebrations remained rare. Life usually revolved around local concerns: fields, families, nearby settlements. The coming festival promised something much larger, a glimpse into the wider kingdom, a glimpse into the immense civilization of which they formed only a small part. As preparations continued, several of Hori's neighbors decided to make the journey. After much discussion, Hori decided to accompany them, not because he enjoyed travel. He generally preferred familiar routines, but curiosity had grown difficult to ignore. His son desperately wanted to see the great temple. Tia eventually agreed. Reluctantly, the journey would require careful planning. Food needed preparation. Animals required arrangements. Work responsibilities had to be organized. Ancient travel demanded effort long before the first step was taken. Weeks later, the group finally departed. The roads proved busier than anyone expected. Families traveled together. Merchants guided heavily loaded donkeys. Priests moved between settlements. Boats crowded sections of the Nile. The closer they traveled toward the festival, the more traffic they encountered. It felt as though the entire kingdom had decided to move at once. For Hori's son, every mile brought excitement. Everything seemed fascinating. Every traveler possessed a story. Every village looked different. Every boat sparked questions. Hori answered what he could. The rest remained mysteries. The journey lasted several days. Then one morning, they reached their destination. The sight stunned them. Even Hori, especially Hori. The temple complex dominated the landscape. Massive walls rose toward the sky. Gigantic columns lined ceremonial pathways. Colorful decorations covered surfaces. Statues towered above the crowds. The scale felt overwhelming. For villagers accustomed to modest settlements, the experience bordered on unbelievable. Thousands of people filled the surrounding area, perhaps tens of thousands. The crowds stretched in every direction. Voices blended into a constant roar. Merchants advertised goods. Animals moved through narrow spaces. Musicians performed. Priests conducted ceremonies. The entire scene seemed alive. Hori's son stared in amazement. He could scarcely process everything he saw. Neither could many adults. Ancient Egypt possessed extraordinary architectural achievements. Standing beside them created a different impression than merely hearing stories. One could feel the power they were meant to communicate. Power, authority, permanence. The message remained clear, even after centuries. The first day passed in a blur of activity. The travelers explored markets, observed ceremonies, spoke with strangers from distant regions. The variety proved astonishing. Different accents, different clothing styles, different customs. People arrived from across the kingdom. Many had traveled far longer than Hori's group. The festival transformed individual communities into something larger, a reminder that Egypt stretched far beyond any single village. As evening approached, fires illuminated the gathering. Music drifted through the darkness. Stories circulated. The atmosphere felt almost magical. Yet beneath the excitement lurked familiar dangers. Large crowds always create opportunities. They also create risks. The following morning, Hori experienced the first reminder. A commotion erupted near one section of the market. Voices rose. People pushed forward. Guards quickly intervened. The cause turned out to be theft. A merchant had discovered missing goods. Witnesses offered conflicting accounts. Accusations followed. Nobody seemed entirely certain what had happened. Yet the lesson remained obvious. Where thousands gathered, criminals gathered too. The same concentration of people that created opportunity also created temptation. Throughout history, crowded events have attracted both honest merchants and dishonest individuals. Ancient Egypt proved no exception. Later that day, another problem emerged. A young child became separated from his family. The situation triggered immediate panic. Parents searched frantically. Neighbors joined the effort. For nearly 2 hours, the family feared the worst. Fortunately, the child was eventually found unharmed. Relief swept through everyone involved. Yet the incident demonstrated how easily people could disappear within such enormous gatherings, not through mysterious forces, simply through confusion. The festival continued. The ceremonies themselves impressed many visitors. Priests moved through elaborate rituals, refined over centuries. Offerings were presented, sacred objects carried through processions. Crowds watched attentively. Religious belief occupied a central place in Egyptian society. For many attendees, these ceremonies represented the heart of the event. Not entertainment, not commerce, spiritual connection, a relationship with forces believed to shape existence itself. Watching the ceremonies, Hori understood why temples possessed such influence. They were not merely buildings. They were institutions, economic centers, religious centers, political centers. Their power extended into nearly every aspect of life. Several days passed. The crowds remained enormous. Business flourished. Merchants appeared pleased. Travelers exchanged stories constantly. At first, everything seemed successful. Then illnesses began appearing. Nothing severe initially. A few fevers, a few coughs, a few complaints of fatigue. The symptoms attracted little attention. After all, thousands of people had traveled long distances. Exhaustion seemed natural. Unfortunately, crowded conditions often allow sickness to spread efficiently. People slept close together, shared food, shared spaces, shared water sources. Perfect conditions for disease transmission. Ancient people did not understand germs. They understood outcomes, and the outcomes occasionally became obvious. By the 5th day, more individuals were becoming ill. Most recovered quickly. Some did not. Rumors began circulating once again. Not supernatural rumors this time, Practical concerns. Would the sickness spread further? Would travelers carry it home? Would markets remain crowded? Questions emerged faster than answers. The festival organizers attempted to maintain order. Life continued. Ceremonies continued. Business continued. Yet concern gradually increased. One evening, Hori noticed a healer treating several patients near a temporary shelter. The sight reminded him how vulnerable ancient people remained, even amid magnificent temples, even amid prosperity. Disease ignored status. It ignored architecture. It ignored celebration. A wealthy merchant could become sick. A poor farmer could become sick. The same uncertainty touched everyone. As the days passed, Hori became increasingly eager to return home. The experience had been remarkable. He did not regret coming. Yet the crowds exhausted him. The noise exhausted him. The constant activity exhausted him. Ancient cities and festivals offered opportunities unavailable in villages. They also offered stresses unavailable in villages. Many visitors likely felt similarly. Eventually, the time came to depart. The roads leaving the festival became nearly as crowded as the roads leading toward it. Thousands of travelers began returning home simultaneously. The journey south started smoothly. The weather remained favorable. The roads remained busy. Conversation flowed easily. Everyone shared memories, favorite moments, unexpected encounters. Stories would continue long after the festival ended. Then, on the third day of travel, troubling news reached the group. A caravan moving ahead of them had encountered difficulties. Not bandits, not war, something else. Water shortages. Several travelers had misjudged distances between reliable water sources. The mistake proved costly. The story spread rapidly among those on the road. For Hori, it served as another reminder of an ancient truth. Travel itself remained dangerous, not always dramatically dangerous, often ordinary dangerous. A poor decision, a missing supply, an incorrect assumption. Sometimes that was enough. The group continued cautiously. Water supplies received greater attention. Routes were discussed carefully. No one wished to repeat another traveler's mistake. Several days later, Hori and his companions finally reached their village. The familiar sight brought immediate relief. Home always seemed more valuable after a long absence. For a while, life returned to normal. Fields, animals, repairs, family, routine settled comfortably back into place. Yet the festival had changed something, not the village itself. Perspective. Hori had seen how vast Egypt truly was, how many people lived beyond his immediate world, how many forces shaped events he barely understood. The realization lingered. Then, as summer approached and the heat began rising once more, another challenge emerged. This one came directly from the river. At first, it appeared insignificant. Several fishermen noticed unusual conditions. Then boat captains noticed them too. Soon farmers began paying attention. Something seemed different about the Nile. The water levels were not behaving as expected. The annual flood remained months away, yet experienced observers felt uneasy, very uneasy, and in a civilization where everything depended upon the river, any unusual behavior immediately became everyone's concern. Because if the Nile failed to behave as expected, the consequences could reach every household in Egypt, including Hori's. The Nile did not change overnight. It rarely did anything so dramatic. Instead, it shifted in small, almost invisible ways that only experienced eyes could notice. At first, fishermen simply said the currents felt different. Then farmers began noticing that the water near certain banks behaved unusually. Then the measurements began to feel slightly off. Nothing obvious, nothing undeniable, but enough to make people uneasy. And in ancient Egypt, unease about the Nile was never a small matter. Hori stood with several villagers at the riverbank one early morning, watching the water move past them. It looked normal. It always looked normal. That was part of the problem. The Nile could appear calm, even when its deeper patterns were changing. An older farmer crouched down, letting the water run through his fingers. He frowned, not dramatically, just enough for others to notice. He had seen enough seasons to trust his instincts more than explanations. The rise will not come as it should, he said quietly. Nobody argued with him, not because they agreed, but because experience, like his carried weight. By the time Hori returned home that evening, the conversation had already spread. Some believed the flood would be weaker this year. Others insisted it was too early to tell. A few tried to remain hopeful, pointing out that the river had surprised people before. But hope and fear often walked side by side in agricultural societies. The following weeks brought more observation than certainty. People measured water levels repeatedly, marked changes on stones, compared notes with neighboring villages. Travelers added their own reports. A pattern slowly formed. Not a collapse, not a disaster, but a possibility, a smaller flood than usual, in a land where survival depended on precise seasonal balance. Smaller could mean everything. Food storage began to feel more important than before. Markets reacted quietly at first, then more noticeably. Grain began to feel slightly more valuable. Prices shifted in small increments. Nothing extreme yet, but everyone noticed, especially those who had lived through previous difficult years. Hori found himself thinking constantly about storage, about reserves, about whether what they had would be enough if the river truly failed them. Tia noticed his silence during evenings. She did not ask too many questions. She already understood. Ancient families rarely needed explanations for shared worry. The uncertainty continued as summer progressed. The river rose, but not as confidently as expected. It hesitated in ways that felt almost human, as if uncertain of its own rhythm. Farmers watched it daily, scribbled observations through word of mouth. Some visited local officials to ask questions. The officials offered calm responses, reassurances, but even they seemed less certain than usual. When authority begins to sound cautious, ordinary people begin to feel it more deeply. One afternoon, Mena returned from travel again. He looked more serious than usual. He had passed through several districts where similar concerns were growing. Not panic, but attention. He told Hori something that stayed with him long after the conversation ended. In some regions, priests had already begun special rituals to encourage the river's blessing. In others, storehouses were being checked more carefully than normal, and in a few places farther south, villages were already speaking quietly about reduced harvest expectations. The words reduced harvest lingered in Hori's mind like a shadow, because he understood exactly what that meant. Less food, more work, greater vulnerability, the kind of pressure that rarely stayed in one place. It spread gradually, inevitably, as the Nile season moved forward. The uncertainty deepened. The river eventually rose, but unevenly. Some areas received sufficient flooding. Others did not. The imbalance became impossible to ignore. Farmers who depended on consistent water distribution began adjusting plans quickly. Irrigation channels were modified. Seeds were rationed more carefully. Every decision now carried more weight than before. Even small mistakes could have consequences lasting months. Hori worked longer hours inspecting his fields, not because he expected disaster immediately, but because experience had taught him that preparation mattered more than reaction. One evening, as the sun set over the river, he stood beside his son. The boy watched the water silently. He had grown older again during these seasons of uncertainty, old enough now to understand more than he once could. "Will it be enough?" he asked quietly. Hori did not answer immediately, not because he did not know, but because honesty required thought. Finally, he said something simple. "We will work with what comes." It was not comfort. It was reality. Ancient Egypt did not offer guarantees. It offered cycles and adaptation and endurance. As the season moved toward harvest, signs became clearer. Some regions produced well, others struggled. The imbalance spread unevenly across the land, affecting communities differently. Villages closer to favorable water flow fared better. Others faced difficulty. Grain shipments began to reflect this unevenness. Officials adjusted records. Tax expectations were reviewed quietly in some areas. The system did not collapse, but it tightened like a rope, becoming slightly more strained. Hori's village remained somewhere in the middle, not devastated, not thriving, managing, always managing. By the time harvest arrived, everyone understood the situation without needing formal announcements. You could see it in storage quantities, in market activity, in conversations that ended sooner than they used to, in the way people paused slightly before speaking about food. The Nile had not failed completely, but it had not behaved kindly either. And in ancient Egypt, kindness from the river was never something people took for granted. As final grain was gathered and stored, Hori stood beside his family in the dim evening light. The season had ended, but its effects had not. He looked toward the river once more, the same river that had given life and taken it away in other years, the same river that shaped every moment of their existence. He realized something quietly. Survival here was never about escaping difficulty. It was about continuing despite it. And as the wind moved across the fields, carrying the scent of harvested grain, Hori understood the truth behind the title he could never have known. No one survived ancient Egypt easily. They survived it one season at a time.